The frost clung to the windows of the Harper family's sprawling suburban home, catching the glow of multicolored Christmas lights strung along the eaves. It was December 25th, 2024, and the house hummed with the familiar rhythm of holiday tradition. The scent of Evelyn Harper's slightly overbaked gingerbread cookies wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the piney aroma of the Christmas tree dominating the living room. Robert Harper, ever the stickler for ambiance, insisted on cranking the gas fireplace to a roaring blaze, despite the thermostat reading a cozy 74 degrees. And as always, Sophie Harper, my younger sister by 3 years, swept into the room precisely 10 minutes late, her arrival choreographed to ensure all eyes turned her way. The tree glittered with ornaments I'd known since childhood, glass baubles with faded glitter, a lopsided star Sophie made in 3rd grade, and a chipped porcelain angel that no one ever suggested replacing. Tradition in this house was a sacred contract, one that demanded we ignore the imperfections. I sat on the edge of the plaid sofa, nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee, watching the scene unfold like a play I'd memorized but never auditioned for. Evelyn, my mother, stood at the center of the room, her emerald green shawl draped over her shoulders like a stage curtain. Her smile was radiant, her cheeks flushed with the kind of warmth that only came when she was about to make a grand gesture. In her hands was a small box, wrapped in silver paper, and tied with a crimson ribbon that shimmered under the chandelier's light. "Sophie, darling," Evelyn said, her voice bright as she extended the box toward my sister. "This one's for you." Sophie, with her perfectly curled blonde hair and a cream-colored sweater that screamed boutique chic, let out a theatrical gasp before her fingers even grazed the ribbon. She'd always had a knack for turning moments into performances, each reaction polished to perfection. She untied the bow with exaggerated care, drawing out the anticipation as if the room were her audience. Inside the box, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a brass house key, its surface catching the firelight. Sophie's eyes widened, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh my God, Mom, what is this?" she squealed, her voice pitching high enough to rival the carols playing softly in the background. Evelyn's smile widened, her eyes misting over. "It's your future, sweetheart," she said. "We bought you a condo, downtown with a view of the river. It's yours." Sophie launched herself into Evelyn's arms, then Robert's, her laughter filling the room like confetti. I forced a smile, the kind that felt like it belonged to someone else, and clapped politely. Robert's chest puffed out, his grin one of paternal pride as if he'd single-handedly built the condo with his own hands. Then Evelyn turned to me, her expression softening into something I couldn't quite read. Pity, perhaps, or an attempt at reassurance. "Emma," she said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial, "you'll understand one day, but I already did." My gift came next, handed to me by Robert with the same detached efficiency he used when passing the salt at dinner. It was a plain manila envelope, no wrapping, no ribbon, just my name, Emma Harper, scrawled in Evelyn's elegant cursive across the front. The weight of it was negligible, but it landed in my lap like a stone. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I watched Sophie twirl her key between her fingers, holding it up to the light as if it were a jewel. Evelyn was already describing the condo's amenities: hardwood floors, a balcony, a kitchen island perfect for hosting. Robert nodded along, his approval as predictable as the sunrise. The envelope sat untouched, its edges curling slightly under the warmth of my hands. I knew what it represented without looking inside. It was a reminder of the role I'd been assigned long ago, the practical one, the invisible one, the one who didn't need fanfare because I was expected to manage without it. Sophie's gift was a celebration. Mine was an obligation. I was 12 when I first noticed the pattern. It was Sophie's 9th birthday, and the house had been transformed into a pastel wonderland. Balloons, streamers, a 3-tiered cake with her name in pink frosting. The backyard was filled with neighbors, classmates, even strangers who'd heard about the Harper princess and wanted a glimpse. I'd spent the morning helping Evelyn frost cupcakes, my fingers sticky with icing, only to be shooed away when Sophie's friends arrived. My own birthday, 2 months later, was marked by a store-bought cake and a card signed by Evelyn in a rush. "Love you, kiddo," it read, as if the words were an afterthought. By high school, I'd stopped expecting anything different. When I won a regional debate competition, Evelyn sent a text. "Great job, Em. Sorry," at Sophie's recital. When I earned a full scholarship to college, Robert called to say he was proud but couldn't make the ceremony. Sophie had a modeling gig that day, and someone needed to drive her. When I graduated magna cum laude, Evelyn was there, but only physically. She spent the entire event texting, her face lit by the glow of her phone, while Sophie's latest Instagram post racked up likes. There was one moment, though, that cut deeper than the rest. Junior year of high school, I'd been selected for a prestigious science internship, one that required months of applications, essays, and interviews. I'd stayed up nights perfecting my proposal, a model for sustainable energy that I'd built in our garage. The night of the award ceremony, I scanned the auditorium for my parents. Evelyn was there, front row, but her eyes were glued to her phone. When I accepted the award, the applause was deafening, but her voice carried over it all. "At least she's good at something," she said to the woman next to her, loud enough for me to hear. The words landed like a slap, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the pride I'd carried onto that stage. I used to wonder if I was imagining it, if I was just the jealous older sister resenting Sophie's spotlight. But the evidence was undeniable, etched into every holiday, every milestone, every moment where love was supposed to be equal, but never was. Favoritism wasn't subtle in our house. It was a language, spoken fluently by Evelyn and Robert, understood implicitly by Sophie, and endured silently by me. That Christmas morning, as Sophie babbled about her condo's open-concept layout, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of a job listing for a data entry clerk at a local accounting firm. At the bottom, in Robert's precise handwriting, was a note. "This seems like a good fit for you." No warmth, no encouragement, just a directive, as if my life's purpose was to fill out spreadsheets while Sophie lived in a riverfront condo. I folded the paper back into the envelope, my fingers steady despite the heat rising in my chest. Sophie was still talking, her voice a melody of excitement, while Evelyn nodded along, her eyes sparkling with pride. Robert sipped his coffee, oblivious to the weight of the moment. I slid the envelope under my thigh, not to hide it, but to let it disappear into the background, just like me. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of wrapping paper and forced smiles. I excused myself early, claiming a headache, and retreated to the guest room, my old bedroom, still decorated with faded posters and a shelf of dusty academic awards. The walls felt smaller now, as if they'd absorbed every unspoken word I'd swallowed over the years. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the envelope burning a hole in my pocket. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. 2 weeks later, I returned to the house under different circumstances. Evelyn had called, her voice thick with worry, saying Robert had strained his back and needed help moving furniture for a garage reorganization. "It's just a few hours, Emma," she'd said, the plea laced with that familiar guilt trip tone. "We'd really appreciate it." I agreed, not out of duty, but because I wanted to see the house again, to walk its halls and confirm what I already suspected. I arrived on a crisp January afternoon, the driveway lined with the same manicured shrubs Robert trimmed with military precision. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and roasted chicken, a combination so familiar it was almost suffocating. Sophie was absent, as usual. "Busy with a photo shoot," Evelyn said with a sigh that somehow implied I was the one letting her down. I nodded, said the right things, and spent the day hauling boxes and rearranging shelves under Robert's gruff instructions. That evening, after Evelyn's obligatory complaints about Sophie's latest boyfriend, I couldn't sleep. The guest room felt like a museum of my own childhood, each item a relic of a life I'd outgrown. I wandered the house, my footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. That's when I noticed it. The door to Robert's study, usually locked tight, was slightly ajar. I hesitated. Robert treated his study like a fortress. Blinds drawn, files secured, computer password protected. But the open door felt like an invitation, or perhaps a challenge. I stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of leather and old paper. A small safe sat in the corner, partially obscured by a bookcase. Its door was open, just a crack, as if someone had been interrupted mid-task. I should have turned away. I should have respected the boundary. But curiosity, or maybe resentment, pulled me forward. I knelt beside the safe, my heart pounding in the quiet. Inside were neatly labeled folders, tax records, mortgage documents, investment portfolios. I flipped through them, my fingers trembling, until I found an envelope marked "to be opened upon death" in Robert's unmistakable handwriting. I opened it. Inside was a will, not the one they'd shared with us years ago, when they'd made a show of splitting their estate evenly between Sophie and me. This one was different. My name appeared first, tied to a property I'd never heard of, a small cabin in the mountains purchased in my name 5 years earlier. Attached was a deed and a series of bank statements showing transfers made under my identity. The signature on the authorization was mine, but the loops and angles were wrong, unmistakably forged. My breath caught. This wasn't just a secret, it was a betrayal. They'd used my name, my identity, to move money and assets without my knowledge. I sat back on my heels, the papers spread across the floor, trying to piece together the why and how. The cabin wasn't the only surprise. There were other accounts, other transactions, all tied to my name, all executed without my consent. I didn't confront them that weekend. Instead, I played the part they expected. Quiet, helpful Emma, always there to clean up their messes. At breakfast, Evelyn chatted about Sophie's latest venture, a lifestyle blog that was really taking off. Robert grunted over his newspaper, barely acknowledging me. I smiled, nodded, and left by noon, claiming a work deadline. Back in my apartment, I pulled every financial record I could access. Credit reports, bank statements, anything tied to my name. The cabin was real, a modest property in the Blue Ridge Mountains, purchased through a trust linked to my social security number. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. There were other accounts, small but significant, and a trail of transactions that pointed to one thing. My parents had used my identity to shield assets, likely to fund Sophie's failed business ventures. I called a friend from college, Rachel, a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud. I sent her the documents, laying them out like evidence in a trial I wasn't sure I wanted to start. She called me back 3 days later, her voice steady but urgent. "Emma, this is fraud. You could press charges. But is that what you want?" No, it wasn't. I didn't want revenge. I wanted answers. I wanted to reclaim what was mine, not just the cabin, but the autonomy they'd taken from me. Rachel and I spent weeks unraveling the financial web, tracing every transaction, every signature. The picture that emerged was both infuriating and absurd. My parents had leveraged my name to secure loans, move money, and even refinance their prized vacation home, a beachfront cottage they'd bought for family retreats, but used mostly for Sophie's influencer photo shoots. The cottage was the key. It had been mortgaged to cover Sophie's failed jewelry line, a venture that collapsed under the weight of poor planning and extravagant marketing. Robert had tried to cover the debt quietly, but the bank was circling, and the property was now headed for auction. That's when I saw my opportunity. With Rachel's help, I set up an LLC, anonymous and untraceable. Using savings I'd scraped together from years of part-time jobs and careful budgeting, I bid on the cottage through a proxy. The process was agonizingly slow, each step fraught with the fear that they'd find out. But when the paperwork cleared, I held the deed in my hands. The cottage was mine. Not as Emma Harper, but as the owner of a faceless entity they'd never connect to me. It wasn't about the property itself. It was about rewriting the script, about taking back a piece of the story they'd written without me. I didn't tell them. I let the weeks pass, let Evelyn's texts about Christmas plans pile up, let Robert's emails about stable career paths go unanswered. Silence, I realized, was a weapon I'd never wielded before. Christmas 2025 arrived with the same predictable fanfare, the same wreath hung on the door, its ribbons slightly frayed, the same gingerbread cookies sat on the counter, their edges just a touch too dark. Sophie breezed in, her hair now a soft auburn, her outfit a tailored blazer and skirt that screamed, aspiring entrepreneur. Evelyn fussed over her, adjusting her collar like she was a child. Robert stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, his coffee mug a permanent extension of his hand. I placed my gift under the tree, a small unmarked box, no wrapping, no bow. We went through the motions. Sophie opened a set of designer luggage, gasping as if she'd won the lottery. Evelyn teared up, Robert chuckled, and I sipped my coffee, waiting. When it was my turn, I handed the box to Robert, my movements slow and deliberate. He took it, his brow furrowing at its lightness. "What's this?" he asked, half smiling, as if expecting a gag gift. Sophie smirked. "Probably a gift card," she teased. Robert opened the box, pulling out a sealed envelope with a wax seal. He broke it, unfolded the papers inside, and froze. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. The deed to the beachfront cottage. My name, or rather, my LLC's name, as the owner. A legal notice from Rachel, outlining the forged signatures and the consequences of identity fraud. Evelyn leaned over, her smile fading as she read the words. "Emma, what is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, my tone calm but unyielding. Robert's face was a mask, his hands gripping the papers so tightly they crinkled. Evelyn turned to him, her eyes searching. "You didn't tell me," she said, her voice breaking. It wasn't a question. Sophie clutched her new luggage, her confusion palpable, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that presses against your skin, heavy and inescapable. I stood, smoothing my sweater, and spoke again. "I'm not sharing the cottage. Not this time. Not my name. Not my future." No one responded. Evelyn's face crumpled, not with anger, but with the slow realization of what they'd done. Robert stared at the papers, his jaw tight. Sophie looked lost, her world tilting without warning. I grabbed my coat and walked to the door, pausing just long enough to let the moment settle. "Merry Christmas," I said softly, then stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a wave, sharp and cleansing. Snow began to fall, soft and steady, blanketing the world in quiet. That night, I drove to the cottage. It wasn't grand, just a weathered shingle house with creaky floors and a view of the ocean that made your chest ache. I wrapped myself in a quilt, sat by the window, and watched the waves crash against the shore. The silence was different here, not oppressive but freeing. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Not because someone had given it to me, but because I'd claimed it. I didn't call anyone. I didn't need to. Some victories don't need an audience, they just need you to stand in them, whole and unbroken, while the world keeps turning.